Good morning. Welcome to the December 14th meeting of the City Schools Liaison Committee. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Chair Lithcott-Haynes.
Here.
Councilmember Burt.
Here.
Board Member Collins.
Present.
Board Member Dara. Okay, we have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to public comment on items not on the agenda.
Seeing none.
We have no requests to speak. Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like you. Okay, our first request to speak is Rika Yamamoto.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Rika Yamamoto. I'm the chairperson from the Palo Alto CAC for Special Education. We very appreciate it that the City of Palo Alto Recreation Program team partnered with us. So regularly we were able to invite them to our public meeting. We also working with them by inviting to our community building events, and as well as parent educational or training supportive event. So we really appreciate the general partnership with the City of Palo Alto recreational team. And we also noticed that the City of Palo Alto recreational team has a partnering with our community organization, who is Magical Bridge Foundation, and they created like a magical series for the young population with the developmental disability. So we really appreciate that. But we still wanted to see more increase of the Palo Alto recreational program. So it's very important that City of Palo Alto be a model for ADA and adapt formal inclusion policies that ensure all community members have an equal opportunity to enjoy the benefit of parks and recreational program. And children and youth with a disability have the right to learn and play, enjoy, benefit from recreational social experience in Palo Alto. We often see parents and family will drive to other neighboring city, so we can find a great example. Other neighboring cities having like a therapeutic program, adaptive program, but we yet somehow hardly find those programs in our Palo Alto local. So we hope that that will be the case going forward. And we noticed that also our school district having the joint programs such as Safe Ride School, and then the middle school after school athletic program, of course, including library exchange program. Then so we request and hoping that our school district and the City of Palo Alto Park and Recreation team can even create a joint venture to further improve accessibility for the existing program. That's like including such as team program, which is wonderful program already existing, and maybe even further to create the other kind of therapy and adaptive program. That would be really great. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have no other requests to speak.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Yamamoto, for your work on behalf of the district and our community. All right, let us turn to approval of the minutes. I do have a technical question as to whether the minutes were distributed.
Yeah, they were on the packet.
They were. Terrific. I must have picked up a copy that didn't have them. Just wanted to double check. Okay. Can I hear a motion for approval of the minutes from the last meeting?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. We will now turn to city and district reports. I have lost track of who went first last time, so I'm going to offer our guests from the district the opportunity to go first.
I just had a couple of things. I think Mr. Collins will have a board report, but
Oh, I better get to work.
yeah, get to work there. as we head into the holiday season, a couple things. We do adopt families for holiday season and try to take care of kids that might otherwise have a very different experience for the holidays. We also just announced our most recent numbers for free childcare in the school district, and it's at 650 students. 4 years ago, it was close to zero. Last year was about 250, and the year before that, about half of that number. So we're really pleased with that, on top of free lunches for students. So there's been some huge changes in that regard over the last 5-6 years. So those are good things. And then we've reminded families and staff that the holiday season is not fun for everybody. And for some, it's a very stressful time, and schools are their actual safer place. So to be mindful of that as we head in and make sure that we're keeping an eye on people. Just finally, in the last 7 to 10 days, we've had delegation from the Korean Department of Education. About 20 of their members came to learn more about our mental health efforts for staff and students. It's kind of internationally recognized now. It's got that kind of attention. So they came and spent a full day with us, and that was actually quite an experience to get to see even how they act and interact with each other. It was so different. So that was super fun. And that ties into one of our PAUSD Promise priority goals under mental health, of course. And in the same week, we had about 30 superintendents and assistant superintendents visit us together to look at our early literacy efforts and to visit schools in our district, learn more about how we received the results we had 2 years in a row, leading the state in that target area. Again, one of our priority goals. And then finally, we just had an event at the Toyota in Sunnyvale, which is one of our partners in our innovation section of our PAUSD Promise, where we were able to hear from their employees about, in this particular case, how athletics had tied them to futures careers. So these are mechanics, these are salespeople. But then we also had Jake Moody, the place kicker for the 49ers, come and meet with the kids and take pictures and do things. So the exciting part there is those are 3 of our 5 priority goals, all honored in big ways in the same week, which speaks to the focus of the PAUSD Promise. So that's it for me.
Anything to add, Board Member Collins?
No.
Okay, let's turn to the city update.
Oh.
And then-
I'll be happy to add with an update on our board meetings, but I'd rather hear the city report first. Thank you. Sorry to go.
No worries.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Just a few things to share. First, just to follow up on your last meeting, there was discussion of what we're now calling the Paths from Palo Alto event and or career opportunities. And I think there are a number of different concepts that are being kicked around. Just want to share that staff have discussed the opportunity, and we're starting the planning with Kristen O'Kane leading on the city staff side. With respect to Coverly, I want to note that next Monday, the council will be holding a closed session on the topic. And the plan would be to meet with district representatives soon thereafter. Next, looking forward to the beginning of the new year. Just want to note for folks' calendars that the council's reorganization meeting will occur on Monday, January 8th, selecting new mayor and vice mayor, and we'd expect to have the committee assignments later in the month of January. Next, city schools meeting, just hopefully no surprise for anyone, the district will be taking the baton for hosting the meetings next calendar year. And also another follow-up from your last meeting discussion of transportation, that we have extended the input timeframe for community members to feed into the bike pedestrian transportation plan. And so that new deadline is the end of this month, December 31st. And the city's website, cityofpaloalto.org/bikepedplan is the site. We've also got links to it on our homepage. And then finally, City Council recently discussed the community survey that the city does annually. And there were a few questions related to education in Palo Alto, and Chantal shared that with Superintendent Austin, and wanted to just ensure that the district was aware of that feedback opportunity. And then last but not least, at noon today, we will be holding the first annual Palo Alto test of our emergency alert system. So hopefully our meeting will not extend to noon. And so wherever you are at noon, you'll hopefully, if you have signed up for the Alert SCC, I'll be receiving a test message on that system. And that concludes my report.
Councilmember Byrd?
Sure. So one thing, just following up on the city manager's mention of this tool to be able to comment on the bike ped plan, it actually has an ability to go in and do geolocated specific notations on where members of the community see a gap or a problem or a need in the bike riding and safety. So it's really great, and we've had a lot of input so far, but I hadn't realized that it had that, and now I've got a dozen pictures that I've got to then go in and enter there. But I think it really gives an opportunity for people who are out in the community and see these nuances that you can't possibly expect, a consulting body to be able to know all that. But it's a great input tool. Then I wanted to, related to that biking issue is one, we had an update on our program on safe streets, which is a comprehensive approach that the city is taking to have all modes have safer travel. And it's an ongoing initiative, but certainly has a strong connection to the safe routes to school. Third on that topic, you may have seen that Caltrans is proposing bike lanes, dedicated bike lanes throughout the length of the cities, really on much of the peninsula. Mountain View and Menlo Park have endorsed it. Palo Alto has a different circumstance in that we have all these parallel routes, short distance from El Camino, with even though this would be a protected lane, that bike boulevards have their own safety and lack of traffic signals and things. So we're really needing to examine more whether that's the better approach for Palo Alto or not. And then I want to mention a couple things on housing. One, this council approved the rental registry so that all rental properties in the city are going to be inventoried and with better data on them that allows us to then look at programs based upon real data in the future. We also had this last Monday, council gave follow-up direction from what it initiated 2 years ago of evaluating the opportunities for downtown surface parking lots to be used for affordable housing projects. And we had a consultant study who came back with two different of the affordable housing providers, giving Mid-Penn and Alta Housing, giving initial kind of concept proposals. And so we've somewhat narrowed that to an initial focus on Lot T, which is by the 7-Eleven on Lytton. And then if that's successful, possibility of other lots in the downtowns plural in the future. And note Charities Housing, which has a very large housing project proposed on, or going through our approval system on El Camino, the former Mike's Bikes site, south of Oregon. They received 13 million from the county on Measure A funds, and that site is for extremely low and very low income, not only individuals, but families as well. And so that part of new housing development in that area, in the greater NVCAP area, certainly affects the school population, as does the last thing on the housing is that we as part of our next submittal on our housing element, we did very significant upzoning in the stretch of the east side of El Camino, from near just south of Palo Alto Square, south there for several blocks. And there are already proposals going through the process for many hundreds of housing units. And all that affects where school populations will be having new residents in the coming next few years. And then lastly, I wanted to mention that the city received $30 million in federal grant for grade separations. And as a result, we're needing to really accelerate our attempt to narrow our preferred alternatives. And one of the big holdbacks that we had was waiting for Caltrain to complete their study of where they needed to reserve space for 4 tracks for a passing track section, somewhere between Mountain View and the north edge of Palo Alto. We have been waiting for several years on that because it affects which alternatives we can have. We don't have to build for 4 tracks, but we can't build something that would preclude that. And to our surprise, the south part of Palo Alto, which has the much wider Caltrain corridor, doesn't look like it works because the San Antonio, they need to have this 4-track location centered around a station. San Antonio station, all of the pillars for that massive overpass system essentially interfere with the ability to put 4 tracks in there, even though the right of way is wide. And so it's looking like the area centered around the Cal Ave station will be the preferred location. And it would begin as far north as just south of Churchill. And even though that location in Pierce Park is extremely narrow, down to 60 something feet, that may be the location that we have to reserve for 4 tracks. We also are just getting back some other technical standards from Caltrain that we'll be reviewing in January. Our staff is meeting and kind of going through those. But part of the reason that these sorts of things impact so much is, for instance, those standards at the Churchill crossing, for example, that influence the bridge deck thickness and the clearance. And that means that how far back from the intersection has to begin an underpass is affected by those kinds of nuances, which one side of the property is on the south edge of Pali. So all of these grade separation issues not only affect the safe routes to school, but otherwise. And then lastly, I'll say that we've been putting greater focus related to the bike and ped master plan on the prospect of initially having bike and pedestrian underpass under Caltrain ahead of reconstruction of the vehicular, and with a particular focus in connecting what had been the long time, what's called the Midtown Connector, from the vicinity of El Carmelo and Loma Verde, crossing under the Alma and the tracks there, through the new development in the former Fry's site, and then prospectively a route all the way out to Bull Park. That has particular relevance to the district because as we put all these students, new residents and a good number of students in the housing development in the NVCAP area, as you all know, and you brought up during the NVCAP process, there are no schools between El Camino and the tracks. But a bike undercrossing would enable students who live there to potentially go to schools on the east side of the tracks without any safety issues, as opposed to having crossed El Camino. Where you would end up accommodating these new students and when is long from being determined, but this is certainly relevant to your long-term planning and consequences to the district, so I wanted to share that. Thanks.
Could I just add some thoughts on behalf of the city and then, okay. I thank you, City Manager Shikata, for mentioning the city attitude survey. And it is so rich with information on, perceptions and realities here in Palo Alto. And it would be lovely, I think, to include a link to that survey for the public to see it perhaps in our minutes. And if we could circulate that to members of the committee who may not have had a chance to see that, I think you'll find it as informative as we do. On the infill lot, potential lot T that Councilmember Burt mentioned, just want to say how exciting it is to think about a little bit more housing in the north end of the city, because Addison, Duveneck, Walter Hayes would be served by those developments should they come forth. And finally, I think it was on December 4th, the city met to discuss whether to expand our safe parking program. And to your point, Superintendent Austin, about the number of students who are now needing free childcare, really speaking to the members of our community who are on the lower end of the SES spectrum. On the city side, figuring out where our RV dwellers and people who live in their cars will go is of course a concern. And so on December 4th, we directed staff to consider an expansion of the Move Mountain View facility on Gang Road, which currently supports 12 dwellers and could conceivably expand to double that. So wanted you to be aware of that. That's it for me.
Gosh, you guys are busy. Just the train stuff makes my head spin.
Yeah.
An update on our activities. First, and maybe most importantly, we're ahead of you. We already appointed our new leadership, and the board president is Trustee Leonard Merrick, and the vice president is Trustee Siegel. So they will be in that position they're in that position now and will be for the next year. We also will have new committee assignments. Our new committee assignments have to be approved by the board, and that generally happens in our first meeting in January. And apropos to your mention of your Stanford, the Coverly thing. We did appoint a Coverly committee. I don't know and don't have any control over whether the members of that committee will stay the same or change. So, but my sense is that committee hasn't really done much. Have they even met done?
No.
Okay, so I mean, whether it stays the same or changes really won't matter, but just be aware that it's possible the committee assignments will change in January. And you might, if possible, maybe you can let President Leonard Merrick know that we're expecting something. She probably does know that we're expecting something from the city, or possibly expecting from the city.
Yeah, they know that.
So she can anticipate and get the committees lined up. Second, we had at our last board meeting update on what we call the Palo Alto Promise. And you know what would be great, Don, is if we were able to send over some of those infographic things.
Yeah.
Or if I can just get some, I'll bring them up.
Yeah, we do.
We have a nice piece of printed material that we distribute to people that summarizes what the Palo Alto Promise is and kind of what we're doing. This is pretty important, and in some ways we don't talk enough about it. The Palo Alto Promise is essentially our high-level strategic plan. And one of the things that we have done differently in the last 5 years that I think has served us very well is that we have very purposefully narrowed the number of things that we try to do, the number of initiatives we have, the number of goals that we focus on. So to 5, and never more than 5. And in fact, the 5 rarely change. What have we changed over the last 3 years? 1 or 2 of them?
1, so 4 of the 5 remain the same. The task underneath have evolved, but the umbrellas, 4 of the 5 are exactly the same.
Which I think has served us well, and it is in sharp contrast to what we did before and what the vast majority of school districts in California, I know across the country too, where they feel pressure appropriately to serve all their stakeholders and constituents. But one of the things that we have found is true of most human organizations, is that when you try to do a lot of things, you do most of them badly and don't make the kind of progress that you'd hope or expect. So we've taken the opposite approach and focused on a narrow number of things. And I'll just list them off: early literacy, equity and excellence, mental health and wellness, innovation, and serving and celebrating others are the 5 elements. And I think as a result, it's simplified things for our team in terms of knowing what's important and what to focus their attention on. And it helped bring us organizational alignment. I heard a great line on a podcast the other day about football. Your father was a football coach, Councilman Burke, that said, advice to coaches that when things aren't working, don't get out your pencil, get out your eraser, and simplify. And I thought that was really good advice for most human organizations, because complexity is often the enemy of organizational alignment. So we had an update on our a mid-year update on our Palo Alto Promise. We'll have a full year update at the end, and we issue an annual report on this, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe we won't, especially when we get the annual report, we'll make sure we distribute it over to the city side, because I think this is largely, I mean, you guys may have heard the term Palo Alto Promise, but you probably don't really know what it means and what it really contains. And it actually is quite central to who we are and what we do now. And so I think it's worth you guys having more information about it. Third, I think this was since the last meeting, in mid-November, we got our enrollment update. And the headline is that enrollment was actually roughly flat in terms of PK through 12, but that somewhat masked the continuing underlying trend, because we added about 100 students in what's now called transitional kindergarten, which is basically school for 4-year-olds, which the state has implemented and we have implemented as part of that program. We added about 100 students in that domain. And since we're roughly flat, that means we went down 100 in the rest of it. And in the bellwether, what I consider the bellwether group, first grade enrollment. Kindergarten is, maybe, as some people don't know, is not required and is not obligatory in California. Some people choose not to send their kids to kindergarten. And so first grade is when you get a real clear read on, you know, what you got. And it turns out, just even with kids coming and going and everything, it's relatively predictable. You can relatively accurately predict what the 12th grade population is going to be based on the kindergarten population. It's really an astounding thing about the world. But all enrollment forecasters do this, and you look back and gosh, that stuff actually works. Our first grade population this year continued its downward trend at about 2 or 3% a year, which has been consistent for the last 10 years. So with some volatility during the pandemic, but now we're basically back on the track we were before the pandemic. So that indicates that absent changes, that will probably continue on that. Now, the number one thing that changes our enrollment trajectory is new housing, particularly new housing that accommodates families. And one of the things that we've learned, and as you guys, I'm sure all know, that not all housing accommodates families the same way. And when we have 1-bedroom and studio apartments, families, that tends not to be family-friendly housing. When you have 2 or 3-bedroom units or standalone units, that tends to accommodate families very nicely, and we see a lot of families. We find that attractive for families. So that's all interesting. I do want to clarify it. I say it. I know you guys all know it, but I say it because I don't think we can say it often enough. It does not. Not only does it not make sense, and it's not necessary. It's not permissible to set housing housing policy in order to accommodate school location or enrollment. In fact, it works exactly the other way around. Whatever housing you build, whatever people move into Palo Alto, we are delighted to figure out how to school them. We'll have no problem. We never have had a problem. I don't anticipate we'll ever have a problem in the future finding places to educate the wonderful children and residents of Palo Alto. So the idea of blowing through capacity or building in certain places to accommodate our capacity, don't worry about it. What is useful, and Councilmember Burke mentioned it, and we've talked about it in previous meetings, is getting a clear heads up about where you anticipate housing coming, so we can start thinking about where our schools are aligned. Because one of the things that's always been the hallmark of the Palo Alto schools is that when people, I said this 100 times during the Stanford Cup thing, when people build new neighborhoods, we try to build new neighborhood schools. And so if new neighborhoods are emerging in the Research Park in outer San Antonio and Stanford West, that it's important for us to consider at least whether we can put schools in those elementary schools in particular in those locations to accommodate those people so we can avoid long transit, bus rides, commutes that aren't, I mean, we can provide perfectly good educations with those things, but one of the core values of our product has been that we provide local neighborhood schools for elementary school students. So I just want to clarify that. I know you guys know it, but you can't say it often enough because it always keeps leaking in. I did want to call out, and maybe at some future meeting, Superintendent Austin can give an update. We signed an agreement of something we've been working on for a while and will continue to work on with Foothill College. And we are significantly expanding our relationship with Foothill, which has been very long. I mean, we've offered this middle college program for at least 25 years. And one of the things that we found is that it is been capacity constrained. As our population has grown in our high schools, the enrollment of that program has not grown, even though the demand for that program has probably grown as a percentage of all the students. And so we really thought that we were underserving students who wanted a different high school experience, wanted a smaller experience, wanted an experience with more independence in their academic journey, wanted more challenging in some cases course offerings that they would get at a community college level. And so we're meaningfully expanding, and we've been doing this program for years with the Mountain View Los Altos High School District, and we're now taking the control of it ourselves and doing our own program, meaningfully expanding it and adding a second one, which I can't remember the name of. You know me?
Might be thinking of College Now.
College Now. And can you just briefly say what College Now is?
It's more for kids who kind of what it sounds like. They want to really jump into college and really separate from the high school experience. So two different kind of approaches, but the both through Foothill and Foothill. Just a quick tag onto that, Mr. Collins providing us an entire building. So 6 classes, the office space, everything. This is going to be really exciting, and we are interested in having conversations about bus routes that can get up there without transfers. That is something we really want to accelerate a conversation on. But yeah, I think that's worthy of a conversation at a later point too.
Yeah, that might be a good actually item to have on our agenda for next year. Because it's a meaningful expansion for us, and we are excited about the prospects of this program. It's something, we've had this relationship, we've had this middle college program for 25 years, but it has really been a thing off to the side, managed by the Mountain View Los Altos district. We were kind of riding on their coattails. And the kids who participated really appreciated it, but it was a limited audience, and we frankly had very little control over it. We kind of just basked in its reflected glow. Now as part of our innovation item under our promise, we're saying this is an area where kids want more and different. And so we have kind of forged ahead and invested our resources and kind of driven a new, larger relationship that we think is going to offer meaningfully differentiated opportunities for high school students, which we're excited about. So I think that'd be a great thing, because we do have to, as we branch away from our traditional, hey, just kids at our campuses, partnering with Foothill, partnering with our partners at the city and the county, because VTA gets involved in this, is something that I think would serve our students well. The last thing I just want to briefly mention, and we talked about it last time, but I'll do it again. I just want to thank the city manager and the staff for the work they did at Escondido. That, and I ride my bike by Escondido fairly often, and I see the conditions there, and I've actually snuck up there during dismissal a couple times just to see what it was like, and I think it seems to have gotten to an orderly place, and I don't think it would have done that without the heavy lifting of the city staff. So I just wanted to say again how much we and our families appreciate the quick action to address that situation. So thank you. That is my report.
Thanks. So I just want to follow up on the Foothill relationships, now the two of them, and glad to hear your interest in collaborating on trying to work with VTA to strengthen the bus system in that San Antonio corridor, which is the only corridor that actually serves the 4 North County cities of Palo Alto, Mountain View, Los Altos Hills, which we have 1 representative on the VTA board, and next year's my last year on the VTA board. And so trying to work together next year to get something across the goal line on improved bus service in that corridor would be timely. And it not only your expanded need for students up at Foothill is a component in that, but we have massive housing that is being built, planned to be built in that corridor by Palo Alto, Mountain View, even Los Altos. And then also those bus systems connect with Caltrain, and as of October, when we get the electrified Caltrain, I don't know if you've seen that Caltrain has announced its new service plan, which basically has fewer trains during peak hour at the main stations like University. Pre-COVID, there were 5.5 trains an hour there. There's just not the demand for it right now. But the great news is that the lesser stations, CalLab and San Antonio and others, will have 3 trains an hour at peak hour and 2 trains an hour throughout the day from 5:30 in the morning to 12:30 at night. And so that becomes not just a commute-focused train route, and it's faster, cleaner, modern. That won't so much serve the students, but it will serve increasing the connector need for bus transit to feed in and feed out of there, as well as future need for bike systems as we build housing in that area. So I just wanted to mention that, and I'd like to really take you up on collaboration on lobbying VTA, because they did a study a year ago in response to my request, but it was all based upon current and past needs, and just there wasn't a look at that future demand and the future transit connectedness, and how that really drives the need for better bus systems there. I did want to ask on your enrollment, you mentioned 100 more students in the pre-K.
PK. It's called transitional.
Transitional, okay. And what's the explanation, as best you have, as to that increase? Is that just because it's getting appreciated more and a higher percentage of those students are going in there, or is it maybe an early sign that maybe we're having some new demographic shift there?
I don't think we have definitive data on that, so I don't want to overspeak. My perception was this is a new program, and the state has promoted it heavily, and most places around the state are seeing uptake in this in this program.
So it's catching on, yeah.
Yeah, is that your, Dr. Austin's closer to this.
Well, we did have some expansion of the eligibility ages. So that contributed. It's only less than 5 years since we've put the TK programs on our school sites instead of Greendale, all consolidated. That's helped. So a couple factors. I'm not sure I'd attribute it to increased birth rates yet. So a little tough to know for sure.
Yeah, and there could be, who knows what factors. Overall, I don't know if you've seen that Caltrans, who's responsible for planning for all the future transportation needs of the state, and the Department of Finance, which is their demographic projections are used by the Department of Housing and others, have both this last year come out with their long-term projections through 2060, and primarily as a result of declining birth rate. They're seeing that instead of a 25% population growth projection that they had previously used, it's 0 or declining all the way out to 2060. And now county by county varies. LA area is expected to have a significant drop in population. The Bay Area overall, I think is a 2% increase, but even that varies. San Francisco decline, San Mateo County flat, San Mateo County or Santa Clara County up 8%, but that's 8% over 37 years, as opposed to 30+% that was projected. So that's not a perfect projection and could change again in coming decades, but that is assuming housing growth and still a net population. And within that is, and the studies may be even greater interest to districts like you. It looks at the shift in the demographics, and out of that, what proportion is younger versus older, and we have an aging population. And so for the school population, it's even a little worse than that. So very interesting data to kind of use as a reference point, even if it's not crystal ball.
I'll just add on the Foothill, Dr. Austin, when you mentioned it at our last meeting, it was this lovely tee up for the conversation we then had about the springtime career opportunities, paths from Palo Alto offering for our kids. And I wonder if you'll have any collateral to share on the college now, on the new enhancements to the partnership with Foothill. If that information is available, we don't yet have a date for our Paths from Palo Alto event, but that's a perfect example of how we would want to widen people's blinders about the track they're on and the other opportunities that exist. All right, do we have any public comment on these reports?
There are no requests to speak.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item D, report out from the subcommittee related to the collaborations between the city and the school district. Which one of you would?
I hope so.
Yeah, okay, I'll lead it off and then turn it over to Todd. So we really, as a follow-up to the presentation that we had on the Beverly Hills model and other models then used, of where Beverly Hills had a master agreement between the city and their school district. And we looked at similarities and differences between what we have and our myriad of relationships, and really didn't think that master agreement was the right fit for us. And yet there is really a need for us to have a more systematic and strategic understanding of not only what exists that we have overlaps in under the shared mission of serving youth and families in our community, albeit with different focuses, but so many different aspects of that. We both have programs and initiatives that are attempting to address that. Sometimes they are deliberate collaborations, and other times they're parallel, and there may be even potential synergies that we simply haven't even recognized because we were doing one set of programs and you were doing another, and there may be opportunities. So what we really came up with was that trying to lay out a full matrix of what are all those different programs in the different categories. Where are the areas that we are already actually deliberately collaborating on? What are the areas that we are each doing initiatives on that may have commonalities and potential synergies that we haven't recognized? And what are, after we've done that, are there gaps that we can identify? I don't think there's a whole bunch of gaps, but once you kind of look at it systematically, it's a better opportunity to identify gaps. And so, but broadly, we have an attachment to this. And when we look through this, it is a very interesting list of areas that include so many ones that we already are collaborating and have developed those relationships over the years. But we've kind of had just this piecemeal understanding. Oh yeah, we're doing that, and putting them together. Even for me, was interesting to see how many areas there were there. They're from the transportation and planning categories. We certainly all know the safe routes to school and the crossing guards. Each of us have local transit. You have school buses. We have now our Palo Alto Link. But for example, the Marguerite shuttle system is probably underappreciated as a publicly accessible shuttle system. And we're having some very constructive monthly meetings now with Stanford on a whole range of issues, but the last two meetings have been around transportation. And one of the things that we really want to look at is people don't realize that Stanford makes the Marguerite system open to the public, but we don't know the routes. It's not integrated with our VTA system and otherwise. And so how can we both make those more widely known and maybe even look at opportunities to tweak them that would serve other elements of the community, including schools. For example, they rather than expand the Marguerite into East Palo Alto, they worked closely with Samtrans, and now there is a Samtrans route that goes from East Palo Alto to the University train station, to the Stanford Hospital, and to the Oval, which is not hitting the schools, but it's, how do we better serve East Palo Alto students in the PAUSD at different times a day? So that's another example. The bike and ped system, not only the safe routes to school, but the capital program that we're going through, which is such an important part of how students get to and from school. Our sustainability programs and the great things that not only are the district is doing in the electrification and heat pumps of schools, but the Terman sustainability model and opportunities there, and the Palo Alto Student Climate Coalition that is active, actually more active lobbying the city than they are lobbying the district and coordinating with them. So lots of great opportunities there.
We like it.
Yeah, I bet. No, we like them lobbying us. So I will say, yeah, and we're actually establishing a more formal role of them as an advisory body to the city on climate initiatives. And then, of course, all of our different initiatives on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and the collaborations that not only the initiatives within the city, but collaborations that we have with East Palo Alto. All the development issues and how that affects what you need to respond to as we add new housing development, youth mental health. We've had, the collaboration on Project Safety Net for many years. The district has taken on their own expanded, I would say, greatly expanded role in that over the last dozen years or so. Teen leadership programs. One stands out that we share is on youth community service, but there are others, our youth councils and otherwise. Sports and recreation. We not only what we have existing, but we had briefly talked about needs in South and Southwest Palo Alto for there's no a publicly available swimming pool, and whether there are opportunities to figure out a solution to that jointly. And not to mention the role of Coverly in all those areas. I hadn't appreciated how strongly our libraries collaborate with one another on a number of programs. And that's just part of just, wow, our staffs have done these things in ways that certainly we as leaders didn't really appreciate. And then, the role of community centers. For instance, we had in our last budget hearing where we have the teen center at the Mitchell Community Center that we were, it's really an after school program. And we were having difficulty staffing it, and now we've been able to staff it. But one of the suggestions that Vice Mayor Stone brought up is to go, well, wait a minute, we have all these staff members, whether teachers or non-teaching staff at right next door at schools there who might be interested in a part-time position staffing there. And just by having these discussions, things percolate on, well, that doesn't cost either of us necessarily. It helps both of us and helps our students, but we just weren't looking at it systematically enough. Certainly the childhood and early education that we've worked on for decades in schools, safety, including emergency preparedness, that we have a really strong city program. And I frankly don't know how much we have collaborated. I know there's been collaboration, but I don't know if there are additional opportunities there. And then how we work with our community partners, all the incredible nonprofits in the communities that many of them help support students and families, how we should work not only with PAUSD as public schools, but the private schools in our community. And that's not necessarily your role, but there are overlaps and potential opportunities, certainly for us as a city, to not think narrowly when we think of collaborating with you folks as leading our school children, but the other schools as well that are supporting them. And then collaborations and often negotiations with Stanford, and how we have kind of overlapping ways that they affect each of us. So I don't think that this attachment A is all inclusive. We tried to capture as many of these initiatives as possible. Two things. One is the question of whether we as representatives through this body would believe that we should go back to recommend to our boards that we adopt not any strategic plan on specific programs, but to adopt in concept that we would going forward, have a ongoing and kind of dynamic set of common initiatives by which we would look at ways that we can work together more effectively, fill gaps where needed, and just endorse the concept of a more strategic relationship without that having necessarily an immediate set of action items, but it becomes a framework for going forward, that we move away from kind of piecemeal engagements, a lot of them, to looking at it in a more strategic way. So it's not necessitating a whole bunch of immediate actions, but it would be the framework within which we would go forward and look at various of these major categories that become more apparent when we put them down on paper and then fill it in and go, that's a lot of relationships. And I would be interested in who in any of our staffs or our electeds, myself included, had a full understanding of how many relationships exist until we put them down on paper and start looking at them comprehensively. So anyway, that's my part of the report. Todd?
Thank you, and thank you for doing the heavy lifting on putting that list together and organizing it so effectively. I don't have a lot to add. I do think, I mean, I agree with your last statement. It's a lot. And it's hard. I agree. I don't think there are many people who look at that list and say, oh yeah, I know about all that. And even fewer who would say, yeah, and I not only did I know about it, but I've thought about the various parts of that. Like one example, it's funny because I added this to the original list, was early childhood, child care and early childhood education, which is an area I did some research on probably a year or two ago, where we started collaborating back in the 60s or 70s. And the city actually has a meaningful program. You've got a committee, and you know, and it's funny because originally the schools were involved in that, and now I think they almost entirely are not. And we in fact have very little intersection with now. Well, we now provide school for 4-year-olds, but prior to that, we didn't have much to do with, you know, kids showed up in kindergarten and we started schooling them, but before then that was somebody else's job. And so, you know, the idea that, and I haven't seen other places, not a ton of them, but there are other places where they try to integrate those systems more effectively than we do, more intentionally at least than we do, and say, you know, early education is there's this arbitrary cutoff between kindergarten through 12 and everything that happens before then. And why? Because it's the same kid doing the same developmental journey. And it turns out, what do you know? Those transitions actually matter. And to the extent that the schools can be effective at both aligning with and adding capacity for and effectiveness for early childhood, then that's something that maybe schools should do, because it serves our own interest in making sure that kids are successful and thriving when they start entering our school system. So it's just, you know, it was an area that we technically have cooperated on for a long time, but the cooperation sort of ossified a long time ago. And we were like, this is good enough for now, and moved on to other things. And times changed and thinking changed, but our programs didn't change, in large part because there was no basis for revisiting them. Once it was locked and loaded and the champions moved on, it was just something that we did, and everybody turned the crank every day. So I tend to agree. I think actively revisiting, having a framework and a forum to actively revisit these things on a more regular basis would serve us well. It would keep us from ossifying, would identify opportunities for better collaboration, would keep us, and I just want to emphasize, I mean, this is worth pointing out because not everybody knows it. We have outstanding collaboration today. But as with many things that happen with both our organizations, we don't always get full credit for everything that we already do. And so because it happens, you know, staff does it, it happens outside of our meetings and, you know, ways that people see, but our staffs actively work together on a whole bunch of these things, including the city manager and the superintendent sitting here, you know, all the time. And so, but that's largely invisible to the community at large, and sometimes invisible to us. So I think bringing that more into the light and getting it so elected officials can participate in it, both to inform us in terms of policymakers and to allow policymakers to, kind of reset the dial slightly on prioritization of some of these things, identify opportunities, and perform our role as not doing the operations part, but saying, hey, there's something out here that we should be working on, or something out here that's gotten forgotten. Can we do something about that? Because absent the forums to do that, we have plenty to keep us busy. We get busy on what's in front of us. So I think it's a good idea. I'm not sure I'm pretty sure we haven't yet identified. We've identified something that we don't want to do, which is sort of this Beverly Hills master agreement, which I still personally really like. I envy them having that institutional mechanism, but it's probably not. It's a heavy lift to get there. They did it for whatever reasons 25 years ago, and now they have it. But I think creating that from scratch without a really compelling reason, I think both of our organizations would probably choke on it a little bit. So I'm not sure what the right forum and organization of that up to collaboration is. But I really do believe that both of our organizations and more importantly, our constituents would be better served if we had something like that. And we would have a better partnership, have more innovation, find even more things to more effectively cooperate on than we do today. So anyway, that's what I think. Thank you very much for doing all the work on that.
I have some thoughts, but I'd like to go to members of the public if there are any.
We have no requests to speak.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to start with gratitude. It's hard that you're on either side of me because I feel the need to do this right now. Thank you so much for your doing the heavy lifting to get us to this point today. I appreciate both of you. I love what you said, Trustee Collins, about we have outstanding collaborations today, and let's not by any means suggest otherwise. And yet there are opportunities for even greater synergies, strengthening of relationships, identifying overlaps and also gaps. And I really applaud you for moving us forward. I did have a specific comment on one of the items on this very thorough list, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Collaborating with East Palo Alto is noted as a sub-bullet. And I found myself thinking about our recent challenges in our community around what's happened on October 7th in Israel and in Gaza, resulting afterward, and how we were both confronted as communities with what is our response as leaders, as policymakers to this moment. And we will always remain separate governmental entities, the school district and the city, and yet we are all representing, to a large extent, the same community. And to have an opportunity to come together to at least inform one another on the communication side. For example, the school district has come up with resolutions or proclamations, I'm not sure exactly which, we have as well. Again, not to collude, but rather to inform, to get to have conversations around, is this an arena in which we might speak with more of a shared voice, or at least speak informed by the voice of the other entity? I think our community would benefit from us having those conversations, even if they do not result in any kind of common language. So that was an example I wanted to add. I think it's more of a comms thing. Again, not to collude, but rather to be informed. Finally, what I wanted to say is to what Trustee Collins said at the end is I'm not sure we have yet hammered out the mechanism. It's not looking like the Beverly Hills formula or mechanism is right for us, at least right now. You've identified the need for a framework, and I'm finding myself agreeing with you and yet wondering, okay, so what is that framework? I think to members of the public who might be listening to this meeting, to colleagues who know this committee exists, they might think the City Schools Liaison Committee is already doing precisely these things. And so how to identify where we are now and what we're doing now and not doing now, and how this new proposed framework might be more effective at achieving the aims that you have identified. So my question for you both is, if we are to agree with this approach as the report states and recommend adoption of the framework to our respective bodies, I think we have a gap right now in how we would articulate what that framework is and how it differs from our present practices. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Me too.
Yeah, so it was something I struggled with and tried to be at least descriptive, if not prescriptive of it in the cover portion of this. And I'm certainly more than receptive to thoughts on how we could better frame that. So that concept of a framework to use to simply have our more systematic discussions was the best I could come up with. But if you have good ideas, they'd be welcome. I even jumping to, for instance, the section on DEI, it's an illustration of that. There are even aspects of the programs that aren't captured here that people will say, wait a minute, well, you left this one off. And one that I realized is that we have the Buena Vista after school study room that has been a collaboration. And as Todd was making the point on the importance of pre-K to make sure that students enter K through 12 with comparable foundations. And they're one of the great problems in that education is that students who enter kindergarten at a disadvantage in their development often stay behind as a result of that. And so trying to get them into kindergarten on roughly comparable footing is extremely important. Same thing though on things like after school programs. Families with resources can offer their kids more tutors, more enrichment programs. So as you've been addressing through all of your really educational equity initiatives that have been such a high priority for the district and closing the achievement gap, some of those things are okay. What other programs after school can help complement that, and that the city has a role in are part of what we have down here in our library programs that actually have great youth and teen programs in our libraries. And how do we make sure that that all the students have access to that? And those are some of the things that I think, as we dig into this, those gaps that maybe aren't leaping off the page become a little more apparent as we just look at subcategories and have creative explorations on what's the need. Are there any ways that we can better fill it? But I beyond that, on the overall framing, I'm all ears.
So I have a
Please.
So a maxim that I have learned in my time on the school board is when the elected start scratching their heads, they should turn to the professionals. And it's helpful that our professional staff, in addition to their general wisdom, often have experience at other districts and other cities and have seen more than what we see. And we're kind of looking into the wrong end of the telescope in our little world here, but they've seen a much bigger world. So I guess I'd ask the staff here if they have ideas about how to structure this kind of collaboration, or they, and maybe they say this is a lot of crap, you shouldn't do this. But I'd be very interested in their perspective.
I think they should be more tactful.
Yeah, at least with the mics on.
That's actually what Mr. Shikata said, and I was really surprised. It just came out. Yeah, my last district had 4 cities, so which is not uncommon. So 4 cities, 4 city managers, 4 city councils. And I think we saw a little bit of what we're seeing here. Yeah, a lot of touch points, not necessarily all coordinated. But I'm thinking about this and thinking about where our conversation started today on the highlights. Focus typically wins the day. And, you know, a thought would be, instead of looking at the entire list and saying we should review these things together, we should go through all these steps. Maybe it's identifying a focus area and going really deep on that between the city and the school district instead of looking at it in its entirety. I think we'd probably have a better chance of success. And I right now, as I'm listening, I do have initial confusion, which I think is fine right now, between what are we trying to accomplish? Is this something to be carried by the elected officials or turned over to the staff? And if so, what clarity is around it? But I think everyone's acknowledged that's probably not completely clear right now.
Can I just add too that one of the functions that I would really welcome from our staffs is in the respective departments or areas is for them to look at what should already be on the list that we just didn't capture. And they may have knowledge of programs that aren't even here. And that would be just to kind of try to have the initial list be more complete. And when you alluded to, you know, not all of these areas need to be partnerships, except just to recognize we don't have a gap in the community because you're doing that and we're doing this. Some of these we work together on, and others we may say and put a category. No, those are things that will stay independent, but we realize that we don't have a gap because we're meeting it in these respective ways. So it's not a suggestion that all of these are collaborations. And that's how one of the ways that I think we need to the next step would be to categorize which of these are existing collaborations, which are coexisting programs, and out of those coexisting, should any of them be collaboration, or should they just be that we recognize that where we're meeting the needs or where there might be a gap, but giving us a way to rationally look at it.
Sure. I would just add to the comments to this point that one takeaway from the conversation that I have is that just starting with awareness of the activities, as has been pointed out, you know, I think we each have and collectively have varying degrees of awareness. So the one step could be to identify by what criteria you'd want things on the list, because it could probably be an endless list and somewhat debatable as to what would be on the list as well. So if, just as a suggestion here, the committee were to identify what criteria you want to establish, and then staff goes off to identify the list itself, that could serve the purpose of awareness that I'm hearing. You know, that said, I'll have to say that the question would be, does the effort or does the outcome justify the effort? And you know, it's certainly a judgment call, and I'm not opposed to the effort, but as has been described, we have robust interrelationships as well as parallel activities in many of these areas. So this could become a significant just compilation. And again, the question is, at what point is that effort no longer worthwhile?
Thank you. I'll add to that. I'll underscore, is the outcome worth the effort? I know that that's always the question we have to ask. And this committee has been trying to grapple with this in the year that I've been on it. And it certainly has been grappling with this in prior years. And what struck me as the newcomer in the conversation, so when we were first trying to gather for this conversation, the right list of topics synergies, overlaps, et cetera. There were a number of documents that had already been created. This is the latest iteration and it feels very comprehensive, and yet I'm sure there is more to add. So I feel that, the effort that's gone in this year to advancing this ball has been worthwhile. And to me, the structure that it ought to eventuate from this effort is perhaps a spreadsheet, so it's sortable, with columns such as gaps and overlaps. So sort of where are we in terms of collaboration, overlap, and therefore potential resource wasting or confusion, gaps where no one's handling it. So a column that addresses kind of who's on this, is it too many, not enough? A separate column for the heat of it, the sort of cool, lukewarm, hot, or, how pressing is this issue in our community, or based on circumstances of now, or long time languishing situation, or massive disagreement. So those are two categories that instantly come to mind for me. We could then sort, we could see what's hot right now. We could see what's, where there are gaps right now. Would love staff thoughts on whether that might be, and my colleagues' thoughts on whether that might be a useful way to categorize. Obviously, there could be other columns, but those are the two that come to mind.
Sure, I think, we could do that. And, again, as I mentioned before, I think it could be debatable as to what would go on there. So I suspect we would take our shot at it in a fairly broad approach, and then see what the committee's reaction is to that.
Yeah, and I'd say, this question of, how granular would you want to be? And there's, in all those circumstances, you start going into a diminishing return, unless there was, say, a particular category that was going to then be a focus area for a while. You wouldn't want to say, oh, we're going to suddenly do 20 new things. But whether it was, I reflect back to when we began to address our teen suicide crisis and the related youth mental health issues. And it went through a couple of stages where initially with Project Safety Net, it was predominantly a city-led initiative because the district at the time, and I'll say that the leadership, both elected and administrative, really initially said that's not really our issue. And now we look at the district and they say, no, we've developed all of these different programs, but a lot of them we in the city have been less aware and kind of only caught up afterwards. Gee, they're doing all these other things. That's why they're less at the Project Safety Net table, because they've taken on these things. And we just weren't really talking about that in say, well, what are our respective roles? What do we think? And what are our plans in these areas? And out of that, I think that's useful. I don't know what it would have changed in the programs, but it certainly would have changed in the understanding in both the bodies, but also even in the broader community of what was being accomplished there. Similar thing, I can see if we have a discussion on South Palo Alto recreation needs and things that we'd start, well, what do we have right now? Let's just have a rational discussion. What are the gaps, and are there any ways that we might help fill any of those gaps? And I just think if you don't look at it more systematically, we just kind of have what we've always had is, for a long while, this ad hoc structure. Even the example that Todd mentioned on early childhood development. Well, these things were a focus area, and somehow they drifted away over time. And if that was done on a deliberate basis, that may have been a right thing to do. But if it was done simply because it was never codified about what is the strategic relationship and roles, and you get a turnover in in elected bodies, a turnover in administration, and the next group says, I don't know what you're talking about. And no, we did this for 10 years. And it was really valuable. And said, I don't see any record of that or whatever. And I just think that the kind of the ad hoc lack of keeping an institutional record so that we're building off of that diminishes the opportunities and the strength of what we're doing. And once again, recognizing that part of it may be to facilitate more integrated collaboration in certain areas, but others is just to understand that we're meeting 90% of what we need to do in this category. Maybe we'll focus on 10%, and it doesn't mean there would be a collaboration. Maybe one of our bodies says, no, that's our territory. Now that we recognize there's a need, we'll prioritize it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a collaboration, but we need to look at it systematically under this rubric of how are we serving youth and families in the community. So anyway, that's my thought.
I have a couple thoughts, and mindful that we're almost at our closing time. I think there's a good discussion. I think this is a tough topic. And usually, certainly at this point in my school district career, most things that come up is like, oh yeah, this is like what happened, blah blah blah. This doesn't fit the category. Other than I remember we worked on this like 3 or 4 years ago before the pandemic, and we ran into the same iceberg, and it kind of, luckily the pandemic came along and let us off the hook. So now we're back. I heard a couple things that I thought made sense to me. And part of this problem is that it operates at more than one level. I think Dr. Austin articulated a mantra that would certainly reverberate in our school organization, which is like, let's pilot something. Let's not try to do a full-blown lob. Let's do a little thing and actually see if we can actually execute on it. And that's, I think there's a lot of sense to that, and makes it so that we have something concrete to kind of model our behavior on. The other is what Pat was saying about kind of going through the framework and identifying things, which is sort of more at this level, but also is something that has to happen. Developing institutional records for some of these things, which is one of the things I had identified before as a real weakness, things I found out that happened 30 years ago that are important, that there's literally nobody who was involved in that anymore. And it's like, but it's important, but how do you even know? One thing that occurred to me, and that you had mentioned, Julie, that people would think that this body would be doing this body could do it. I mean, one of the things that we did, Chantal may remember, it was 4 years ago or something, when we rewrote the charter thing, and we got the bodies to that somewhat. I mean, if you go back and look at that, it kind of made it so this group was more action oriented than it had been before, which is before it had been strictly, let me tell you about my meetings. Let me read what's in the paper about my meetings, and you can read me what's in the paper about yours. And so if the leader of this group were interested and the members were interested, I mean, you could start either of those things, taking on a single issue, going through the whole framework. You could do it in these meetings. You could get additional staff to come. You could do the whole work. I mean, it'd be Brown Act work, and we'd do it in public. But I mean, hey, that's not bad. So I don't think it needs to. I mean, I think we're all hesitant to do this because no one likes to call their own number to do more work, and we've got, and we're all hesitant about how this will really look, and I'm maybe worried about being, sort of speaking for myself, worried about being embarrassed how badly it might go. But that's how you learn. And so rather than, that's one path for going forward, with saying, if we want to try this, we're probably the people more convinced than anybody else, rather than try to convince other people to do it. We can just try doing it ourselves and see if we come up with anything that we want to promote to others. So that's all I got.
Yeah.
So one of the things that when Todd talking about kind of the role of this committee, that reminds me that we have some of these categories that we will once a year or so have the Safe Routes to School meeting, or others on update on trying to remember some of the different agendas that we've had. And as I kind of look at these major categories, those could be topic areas throughout the year for this meeting. So one might be, okay, let's have a meeting around our sustainability programs. And so that we're sharing information. I frankly think that there would be a lot of collaboration opportunities there. I don't even know how well, there's kind of two categories. How well the district knows what we're doing, how well we know what the district's doing. I know some of these things that the district's doing in that only because of discussions I've had with Todd on sidebars. And it's just not widely understood certainly in our elected bodies. But also through even communications. So as we're looking at this kind of cutting edge electrification or heat pump water heater program, I've been convinced that one of the strongest forces to achieve adoption of that program is students to their parents, and having a greater awareness in the broader student population, not just the Palo Alto Student Climate Coalition and those wonderful activists, but the broader student population going to their parents and say, Mom, Dad, you got to do this. And so that's kind of a communication opportunity that wouldn't be a program mandate, but it would be, how do we tap into that resource of youth driving climate programs? Just an example. So I think maybe out of having this be a look at topics for the coming year of these meetings, and each of those wouldn't start off with known actions. They'd be sharing the programs, and then some natural synergies often emerge from just simply saying, okay, here's what we're doing, here's the objective, here's what we're doing, here's what you're doing. Are there any things that we might work better on? And the answer might be no. I'm really glad to have learned what you're doing, but we don't have anything else. But I think often we'll have the other thing that says, oh, we can help each other.
Thank you for that. I think procedurally where we are is at the conclusion of the meeting of the City Schools Liaison Committee that has been meeting all year, and this is the final meeting of the year. And we have hit a procedural roadblock, which is we don't know whether in January, actually, is there a meeting in January? Or okay, right. So February, thank you. It is quite conceivable that there will be some different members on this committee. And yet, as the chair, I'm feeling certainly the need to advocate to the respective leaders who will make those decisions, the mayor and the school board president, Letta Mirak, that this committee has been hard at work figuring out some really important structural things, and it would behoove this committee to be served by the same members. Each one of us has the right to express to our leadership the committees we want to be on, but I will be putting forth a request that in order for this conversation to continue, because we are not yet at a place, we are out of time and not yet at a place to be clear about how all of this work will be served going forward, or what the format will be going forward. So the two of you are on this wonderful subcommittee. You've done all this work. It is now the holidays. My hope is that you will be able to continue this work next year, but that whether you are able to or are even on the committee is not up to me. So I think what I'd like to ask is that we put on the agenda for the next meeting. I assume agenda items can carry over despite the fact that, right?
Yeah, because otherwise there's no agenda for February.
Right. That this topic of hammering out the framework for more effective, or whatever the right language is, hammering out the framework that is a result of the conversations we just had, that should be on the February agenda. We can figure out it. Go ahead, Pat.
I would just along that line, and that framework be used for consideration of agenda items for the year.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
All eyes are looking at me, that's fine.
Okay, any further comments? All right, with that, the